That's pre-season testing for 2024 done. But what did we make of what we saw? We had 3 days, 8 hours each day, and I watched all of it, and I thought I'd share with you my thoughts on every team and sort of what happened and where the pecking order is. Let's start with Red Bull. GPS data suggests that Red Bull were running their engine conservatively across all 3 days, which really shouldn't surprise anyone. And people believe they did most of their runs with at least 80 kilograms of fuel, so they were heavy. I appreciate, though, that none of that is factual. There is a level of conjecture and looking at the data and trying to work everything out. But Formula One have some pretty good calculations these days, and things all seem to point towards Red Bull being the dominant team again. I will caveat this with the fact that most other teams will have been running higher fuel and different engine modes, so we don't really know how everyone stacks up at the minute. The systems that calculate these things, though, for Formula One and the teams, they do it pretty well, and it does seem to be that Red Bull are ahead. Now, excusing the data for a second, forgetting all the data, forgetting engine modes, forgetting everything else, that Red Bull is hooked up. I don't love the look of it. The engine covers now with those Mercedes-sized cannons don't really make it look as nice as last year's car, but it's stable and it rides the bumps so well. The way the rear suspension and the diffuser on the floor work together, it's the smoothest looking ride. And I appreciate smooth isn't fast, but Max said the car does everything he needs it to. It all correlated to what they have in the sim. It looked like, on the very first morning, it looked a bit leery. I'm not going to lie, it looked a bit leery, and I thought, oh, maybe they have got something wrong. But they dialed it in, and then it didn't look like it had any oversteer. There was no snaps. It looked like Max was able to extract the best time from it easily. And that should worry everyone. We don't know, but everyone in the paddock seems to think that Red Bull are ahead, and I do as well. By how much, we don't know, but they're definitely ahead. The chasing pack, on the other hand, that's where it gets a bit blurry. Aston Martin, well, they quietly got on with their program and seemed pretty good on long runs. Alonso in particular looked really comfortable in that car. Ferrari, though, well, they seemed very strong on their long runs. One of the weaknesses of their car last year was race pace and tyre deg. And it seems like they really got the car dialed in. Again, it looked pretty loose at the rear on the first couple of days. Had really pointy front end, but looked a little bit loose. And then it feel like they got it dialed in, and it looked really nice out on track. From what I've seen from the team and what I've heard from Fred Vasseur, they seem to have fixed these issues with tyre deg, and their long run pace actually is now a lot better than their one lap pace. So that's what they need to work on this week. It seemed to manage its tyres, really well. So that's a good sign for the race, at least. The reality is, though, we don't know how close they are to Red Bull. The hope is that they're there or thereabouts. And I think if any team has a chance of being there, based on what I saw, it was them. It was Ferrari. Mercedes, on the other hand, they were interesting because they seem to be doing a slightly different plan than other teams, focusing on understanding their car and making setup changes to see how that reacted. I appreciate that all teams are doing that to some extent, but I got the feeling they were doing that a little bit more. They were experimenting with car setup because they've changed the concept so much. They want to know, if we make this change, does this correlate to this change we made in the simulator? Does it all match up? And from what they're saying, it does seem to. Both Lewis and George said they were much happier with the car. They said it was actually fun to drive, completely different car from last year, and they can actually lean on it more in the medium and high-speed corners. I will say, though, during the whole 3 days, Lewis looked less comfortable. There were still these snaps of oversteer, but again, that might be because they're experimenting with things. But their long-run pace looked pretty good, and in the second and third day, they did seem to dial the car in a little bit more, and it looked a lot more hooked up. I just don't know where they sit. We don't know exactly what their engine modes are, obviously, or their fuel, but I do feel like on some of the runs it looked like they were on lighter fuel. We'll just have to wait and see. Then we got McLaren. Now, they were much harder to read. They had a few issues, which meant they didn't actually get in all the laps that they wanted. The red flag and train covers didn't help, but they had a clutch issue on the third day. Lando only did 20 laps, and then Oscar got in the car. Then they had a couple of niggling issues earlier in the week as well. The car looked solid enough when it was out on track, but I'm just not sure I can say where they sit. They had decent pace on long run. From the data that I looked at with Oscar, they seem to have decent pace. But Bahrain isn't normally one of their stronger circuits. It's normally one of their weaker circuits. A lot of people have McLaren ahead of Mercedes. I honestly don't know right now. Lando said after testing that both Red Bull and Ferrari were a long way ahead of them. Read into that what you will. We believe Red Bull are ahead, and based on their data, they think Ferrari are also ahead of them. It doesn't sound great for them right now, but we know that that's an iterative process, and they're definitely in a better position than they were last year. Ultimately, I think Red Bull are ahead of everyone, but we just don't know by how much. And then I think you've got Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston, and McLaren there or thereabouts in that pack. Maybe Ferrari just a little bit ahead, but we know that some of these cars have still got a lot of pace to unlock. We only had 3 days of running. The worrying thing for everyone is that Red Bull are meant to be bringing their first upgrade package to Japan. I think that's round 4, so it's only a few races in. If they're already ahead and then they bring this other upgrade, people should be worried. Now let's talk a little bit about the midfield. Alpine. Now, I've been quite vocal about not liking how the livery of the Alpine looks, but let's talk about the car. The car itself just didn't look... It looked heavy. It looked unbalanced. I appreciate I'm no handling expert, but it didn't look fast. Supposedly their engine is still one of their limitations. There's something about this car that I just can't get on board with. I'm not sure if it's the wide nose. When I see it coming, that wide nose, it just doesn't feel sleek. It doesn't look nice. And then Gasly came out after the test and said he thinks the first few races are going to be a struggle. The team themselves weren't unhappy with what they achieved. The plan that they did, they weren't unhappy with it, but it doesn't seem like the car's particularly fast. It's been a couple of rough years for Alpine. I think they were hoping for a bit of a turnaround, but I'm not sure that's going to happen, at least not in the early part of the season. Then you've got Williams, who did a lot of laps, but I'm still a little bit unsure of their outright pace. I think maybe they're towards the back of the midfield based on what I've seen. The car looked pretty good. Logan did a lot of laps. Albon was pumping in the laps. But there's a bit of trepidation there within the team. They feel as though now they've lacked, or they lost a little bit of straight line speed because their car was really, really good at that. But they've gained some in the corners, which is where they wanted it. That was a good trade-off. But they're not sure that they've gained enough because a lot of the packs move forward. Then we have Stake and Racing Bulls. Now, I think the Racing Bull looked very, very good. The car looked balanced. It had good turning. It looked like the drivers were able to extract decent lap times quite comfortably from it. I thought Ricciardo looked really comfortable. Tsunoda seemed to be really pushing it on day 3 and day 2. They didn't really seem to be fighting the car at any point. And I got the feeling that they're going to be very quick this year. We know they've got a lot of parts from Red Bull, so you would hope they would be. I think they're going to be one of the quickest midfield teams, and teams like Stake, Alpine, Williams, they're going to be chasing them. Stake, on the other hand, they had a fairly quiet few days, but they got on with their plan. I think they'll be there or thereabouts. You're certainly not going to miss them with that livery. Haas, on the other hand, I think they're going to be at the back, and I think they know they're going to be at the back. They've got a fair amount of laps done, to be fair to them. Both Nico and Magnussen kind of anonymously just cracked on with their day, got plenty of laps done. So they'll have tons of data on their side and then go back this week and they can look at that. But they thought they were going to be at the back of the grid before the season started, even before testing. And I didn't see anything in testing that would make me think that that isn't going to be the case. Sadly, there's going to need to be some big changes, I think, in that team and that car to push them forward. One of their big negatives last year was they had actually really good one-lap pace, a bit like Ferrari, and they were terrible with tyre deg. They would just burn through their tyres. So that's something they've got to focus on this year. I'm not sure there were any big surprises during testing, apart from maybe drain covers popping up. That's something that I think the circuit organisers are going to have to be made aware of before we go to all these circuits. These ground effect cars, they're pulling up drain covers all the time now. Make sure before we go to a circuit that all of those drain covers are as they should be. You know, people have got plenty of fair warning now. The truth is, though, you've got all the data in the world, all the simulations in the world, and no matter how accurate they'll be, we won't know the true order until Q3 next week. And remember, Q3 is on Friday, or qualifying is on Friday, rather than Saturday next week. I just wanted to say as well, thank you to everyone that tuned into my testing streams this week. I streamed all of the testing here on YouTube and on Twitch, and honestly, it was really nice to engage with everyone, talk about what was going on, and talk about our theories and all the rest of it. And I really enjoyed that back into. I really enjoyed that. We had some nice viewership. Really pleased with how many people tuned in to listen to me droning on for 8 hours a day. And I intend to do all watch-alongs for the races and all the main sessions this season, just like we did last season. Obviously starting next week with the Bahrain Grand Prix. As always, I am always excited at the start of the season. Despite the idea of Red Bull dominating, I'm still optimistic we're going to have some good racing, and hopefully Ferrari and the other teams will be there or thereabouts. I'm looking forward to lights out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.